Okay, it's 6 o'clock, so we'll call this meeting to order. This evening, Mayor Graham is out of town, so I'm the Mayor Pro Tem, so I'll be running the meeting. Steve Bremner is in Bolivia, the Ward 3 rep, but he is on the line with us. Our attorney, Jeff Parker, is also on the line, so he'll be joining us for this discussion as well. So if you would, Judy, do the roll call.
City Council members: Judith Chandler,
Present.
John Shada, Julie Wolf, Natalie Johnson,
Here.
Steve Bremner. Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Nancy Fortune.
Present.
Thank you. And I will make note that our Mayor John Graham is absent.
Or excused, yes, thank you.
Absent.
All right.
Thank you.
Our only agenda item, this is a special meeting this evening before we go into our work session. So our only item on the agenda this evening is COVID discussion and possible decision. And I'd like to just say a few things before we start. First, when it comes to masking, people obviously are in two very different camps. And I generalize them into individual rights and the greater good for the community. We feel that this council, I believe, feels, and I think I can speak for the council, feels that protecting the larger community outweighs the individual rights in this particular instance. However, we are open to listening to make adjustments as is appropriate, which is what we'll be looking at this evening. I'd also like to thank all of those who have written us or talked with us, especially those that were well argued and factual emails. And I think that they contribute very positively to a robust discussion about this issue. This is not an easy decision or discussion for us, and I'm very confident that none of us take it lightly, and we will continue to research and discuss options as we take our responsibility very seriously and are very cognizant of the fact that our decisions have impacts that ripple throughout our community in ways that are sometimes difficult to foresee. So that's one of the reasons we're meeting this evening in regular session on an off week. We got a request from the school. Thank you, Elizabeth, for your modeling some very reasonable requests to us and how we can work together. So we will be looking at that this evening and clarifying our policy against what the school board or the school superintendent has requested. So with that, I would ask Denise, yeah.
Mayor Pro Tem, I'm sorry, we forgot to do the Pledge of Allegiance, and I don't know if you want to do that or not. It wasn't on the agenda, but I just thought I would mention that.
And I assume that given the special circumstances that we probably wouldn't do it tonight. Unless there's okay. So with that, Elizabeth, if you'd come up, and Denise, I think it would be useful, I hope, and I don't know, Judy, can we bring up the schools, out of the packet, the school's request? And just to preface this, the school came through with a number of variances that they were asking for, and when we looked at them again, and that came, I believe, before we formally published the city's mandate. So once we compared the two, there wasn't that much difference between us. So Elizabeth, if you could go through your requests, that would be great.
Sure. Before I start, I just would like to share some thoughts and some perspective for us as a school district. Again, City Council, thank you for this time just to make this special meeting. I think it means a lot to us as a school district and as a community. Thanks to Denise for her leadership. And here beside me is Cameron Jones. There'll be an opportunity for him to speak specifically around sports and in-sport activity. So the reason I'm here today is not because of the mask order itself. I'm here to share concerns about how we got here today, I believe. After 3 years of schools, staff, parents, and especially students being impacted by COVID, we've learned a lot. One of the most valuable lessons has been that key stakeholders need to be at the table. This is the request that I and the Board of Education member, Gary Smith, made last week when we spoke to City Council, prior to us knowing that this vote was going to be taken. Again, my statement is not a response to wearing masks. That's not what I'm talking about. However, there are some things that this current mask order does not consider when it comes to public education and the role we play in the lives of children, staff, families, and the community. These have been identified in the variance request that I provided to the city last Friday, August 20th, 2021. Additionally, I'd like to share some key facts. How many children are in the hospital right now today due to COVID? 0. How many Manitou Springs School District 14 students entered the hospital last Friday? 2. How many suicides calls did we receive in a 48-hour time period from Friday to Saturday of last week? 2. Are any of these numbers okay? No. I share these numbers because COVID is not the only safety and health concern we are responsible for as a school and district leaders. In fact, we have a multitude of those other health and safety requirements. In the absence of a parent, the school must act with the child's health and safety as a priority to make sure the child is well cared for and safe. What does this mean in a typical year? School buses driven safely on dry roads, mountain roads, and snowy roads, playground and bus duty, directing traffic, fire drills, active shooter drills, AEDs, food that is safe, mental health services, monitoring, giving glucose, insulin, medication, training in CPR, sanitation. In these conversations about students, staff, and families, what data matter? They all matter. The number of students who have committed suicide this year in our local county is 15 students. That's a crisis. The number of staff who have worked tirelessly to do everything they can to remain healthy, follow procedures, wear masks when we ask them to, while they're teaching, providing medical attention, cleaning and disinfecting buildings, driving buses, you name it, 100% of our Manitou Springs School District staff. The number of parents who have been impacted by this pandemic for reasons of work lost, child not getting to learn in ideal circumstances, seeing their children fall down in tears, frustration, anxiety, and depression, or just fear of their child getting COVID is 100%. I want to share fentanyl mixed with a binder, a blue pill, has an M on one side and 30 on the other side. These pills go from anywhere from $8 to $20. In 2016, the Metro Vice and Narcotics Unit recovered 37 doses of fentanyl. In 2020, the same group recovered 55,000 doses. You know, none of us want any child or individual to die on anyone's watch. And what does this mean? You know, we had a child who tried to commit suicide the first day of school. Our current mental health crisis is a crisis. It is nearly something that our mental health team are providing risk and threat assessments once or twice a week. So I share these things just to say that the safety and well-being of our children and our staff and our families is always a priority. You know, last Friday, we had a 911 call of a medical emergency on campus. We called 911, our local first responders responded, our staff stayed with the child. The parents weren't able to get there. Our principal rode in the ambulance on behalf of the parents, and then our CFO followed behind. You know, and then 2 nights before that, we had a safe to tell tip that came in. This is an anonymous reporting system where we received some feedback and our mental health team responded. I share all of these things to say that we are 100% committed to the safety and well-being of all of our children. And last year I often said, I personally can't prevent anyone from getting COVID. As much as I'd like that superpower, I just don't have it. But what we do have is students and staff who have had COVID. We also have students and staff who are fully vaccinated. We have better practices for layering protections and clear expectations for remaining home if sick or if someone has been around someone with COVID. Will there be a positive case? Maybe, most likely. Do I or anyone want that positive case? Absolutely not. Continue to stay home if we're sick and if we've been around somebody. Our school board is exceptional, our students are exceptional, our staff members are exceptional, and our families are exceptional. And we're excited to be here today with you so that we can be exceptional together. During the city council meeting, we believe that it's important for us as a school board and a city council to continue to develop our strong partnership. The last thing I want to share with all of you is that some feedback and some questions I've received from our community is tying this order to a violation and a penalty. Seems, as the feedback has been, is that this is opposite of really some restorative practices that Manitou Springs has been known for many years. So when I get calls around, is my child going to be arrested? What's going to be the criminal record for them? Those are hard questions to answer, and so that's why really us being on the front end of these are very important. So everything I've known about Manitou Springs is grounded in relationships and these restorative practices, which schools do every day. For all of these reasons, this is why this requires discussion with local health officials, school district, and in partnership with all of you. And we're excited about that. Our goal is to continue to be proactive with implementation versus reactive. Again, these comments are not to ask to remove masks. That's not the conversation. These comments are just to share that everything has a ripple effect, as we know. And at this point, I'm happy to talk through any of these, or Cameron can speak specifically about sports. So whatever you prefer. Mayor Pro Tem.
What I would like to recommend, and based on council's input, is perhaps forming a task force with 2 council members and 2 individuals from the school to work through some of these issues and come back eventually to council. We'd have to set a timeline on that. And tonight, quite honestly, my goal was to, again, based on council's approval, would be to make those immediate changes that you had, or consider those immediate changes that you had asked for. So I would look to council now for their input on the best way forward. Mr. Shada.
Yes, Madam Mayor. I move that we take I believe it's page 9 of the packet, and I believe it is page 9 of yes, 9 of the packet. And it's titled at the top, Exceptions, Individuals Performing Any of the Following Activities. And I move that we adopt all of those, A through J, okay, per the school district's request.
Second.
Further discussion? Hearing none, if we could vote. All in favor? Okay, thank you. Thank you. I always forget that there's somebody on the phone. So that's one step that is hopefully will mitigate some of the issues that the school has been dealing with. I do have, and so I would like to come back to the question of if we could set up a small task force with 2 members from council and 2 members from, as Elizabeth directs from the school, to talk about those things that we brought up last week, and in terms of what are the thresholds or the triggers to loosen this mandate, or at what point we might loosen it or release anybody from having to wear masks in public places. Discussion? Natalie?
I mean, I support that. I think it would be, I don't know how quickly we can move forward, but the sooner the better.
I agree as well.
I have no objection. I have no objection to there being 2 people to join together with the school and form a task force if that's what the school would like.
So it seems we have, and Mr. Shada? Excellent. I would ask then for 2 volunteers. I have a recommendation. Judith is one of my recommendations. And is that, Natalie, are you volunteering, or John, are you volunteering? Okay, so Natalie, you're volunteering? Okay, so we have 2 people. Would that work for you?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think this is one of those examples where we can do these in a really thoughtful way, using the data that we have as a school and really giving some insight to why we decided as a school district to start as we started. Again, we just appreciate the time, and we're going to move forward through this together, and I think we can do this very well. So thanks, Nancy. My question, I think we can either have just a couple of folks from our district. I think that'd be great. How do you see that facilitating or starting?
Absolutely. Judith or Natalie, who would like to take the lead on this?
It's probably easier for me to take the lead on this.
I support Natalie taking the lead.
Okay. So Natalie will coordinate with Judith, and Natalie would coordinate with you to set up a time and location, and I would say sooner rather than later, that we can move forward. It is on our agenda for the next week and the following week. I'm sorry, Denise, yeah.
Madam Mayor, are you wanting anybody from administration on that, or are you only wanting council?
Do you guys have a preference?
I think administration is busy. I think council can handle it.
Council can manage.
Yeah. I think, yeah, they can come back and brief as well, so.
Mayor Fortune,
Yeah.
if it's all possible, someone from maybe the local county public health department could also be a part of this. Not necessarily a decision maker, but just provide some data that we
Sure.
may need.
I'll let the four of you get together and work it out how you want to operate and come back to us, say within 2 weeks, with a recommendation for how we move forward.
Great.
And if you've got solid recommendations that council can act on, fine. If it's just a process that you put in place, fine, whatever. But if you come back within 2 weeks, is that reasonable?
Yeah, it's perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Again, we appreciate the time and the collaboration here.
Mayor Fortune? Mayor Pro Tem Fortune?
Yeah.
We do have some people that had put in requests before the meeting started to speak.
Okay, thank you. I would ask now if there's anyone from the galley who would like to speak with us, that we are available. We don't typically have a discussion with members of the public, but we do take your input, and we would ask not to repeat what has been said previously. So is there anyone who would like to speak with us? Yeah, and 3 minutes, yeah, okay. Judy, do you have the names there?
Yes, so if you'd like, I can start with the first one.
That'd be great,
and
thank
move
you.
through. So Ross Whale? Or Whaley? Weigel? Okay. Oh, okay.
And Mr. Wiggle, if you would come up and state your full name and your address. And yeah, push the button at the bottom of your microphone, it'll turn green. And again, we will ask that you spend no more than 3 minutes, less if possible. Thank you. Okay, and you have to speak very close, almost like you're kissing the microphone, so.
Sorry, I'm trying to get my timer up too.
We can time it here if that's what you're trying to do. We'll give you a minute warning.
I think she was touching it. That's okay. All right, can you hear me? Yeah, sorry, I used to speak in high school, and so I like seeing my time too. My name's Ross Weigel. Most everybody gets that name wrong at first, so no problem with that. And this is my daughter, Gavin. My address is 2 Stover Lane, live in Manitou Springs. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to speak. And wanted to start out by saying my reason for coming here, I saw the meeting, I watched part of the meeting on YouTube. And my purpose for speaking is to find out why we're doing a mask mandate and when will it end. So I like starting out with a story. I think most of you are familiar with Magellan. Magellan sailed around the world, and he was also an astronomer. He determined that the world was round. This was about 500 years ago. And most of the community at that time laughed him out of the community. We now know pretty sure that the earth is round. And I wonder if we're not in a similar situation right now. So I have some facts. Right now, the deaths due to COVID in ages 0 to 17 is 361 in America. Out of all the deaths in that age group, which is over 53,000, that equals less than 0.01% of that age group are dying due to COVID. The next point is hospital beds. Right now in El Paso County, and I sent all of these links to City Council if you want to reference these. In El Paso County, there are 7% of hospital beds being used up, period. So that's for anybody. And then the question too is, do masks work? I sent some links to in the email about this. There's a lot of study. You don't have too much time to go into that. I have a friend who works in an office where they're required to wear masks at all times. They had to leave the office in order to take their mask down. Somebody unfortunately came to the office with COVID. They didn't know it at first, but every single person in that office got COVID despite wearing masks. We've done some study. Some of the reports I've read are how small this virus is so small that it easily goes through cloth masks. Something I want to share as a different part of the facts that are out there.
1 minute.
So one question I was going to ask is if you guys will collaborate. I'm really glad to hear about this council being formed. Thank you guys for doing that. Thank you, Elizabeth. And also the big question, I think it was mentioned earlier, is I want to know what data point was used to decide why we're doing a mask mandate and what data point will be used to decide when it's been too much, which we already brought up. I'm glad to hear that. I thank you so much for determining that. And lastly, to conclude, again, just as a citizen, as a father, I have 3 kids in Manitou Springs Elementary School. I would like to know what made this decision, and also what will be the deciding factor when we decide when this mask mandate will be done. And thank you again. It's Ross Weigel here in Manitou Springs.
Thank you, Mr. Weigel. Who do we have next, Judy?
Next, I have Keith Vance.
And again, I would ask if you're going to say the same thing, if you would consider relinquishing your time. Thank you. Name and address.
Thank you, Council. My name's Keith Vance. This is my wife, Patricia, and we're at 3325 Cedar Heights Drive in Colorado Springs, just across the road, Highway 24. We came here tonight not to try to change the mask mandate. We're not anti-mask. We're not anti-vax, and we appreciate what you're doing to protect our community. But we have a daughter who is one of the captains for the volleyball team at the high school, and she's a senior this year. And we've seen that it's difficult for her to wear a mask during practice and during tournaments and games. We watched her over the summer playing club volleyball, and we were out at Atlanta one time, and Atlanta was hot, and they tried to keep it air conditioned, but it was still hot in this giant convention center, and they're wearing masks and trying to play volleyball. And at the beginning of the game, everything would go okay to a certain extent, as best as can be expected. But as the girls would get hot and sweat, and they'd come to and get water breaks, and they'd drink the water, and it would drip onto the mask, and the mask would become wet, it created a situation where it was difficult to breathe. And, you'd see them pulling it down and taking gasps of air during the game while they're out there exerting themselves trying to win. And it just wasn't a good thing. And so I just want to say I appreciate what you're doing for the kids and what you've done tonight to alleviate that. I do think it will contribute to an increased mental health. So thank you.
Thank you.
I also had submitted my name.
I was going
Okay,
to
go
mention
ahead.
that.
Perfect. Patricia Vance, 3325 Cedar Heights Drive. As Keith mentioned, our daughter Caitlin is on the volleyball team. It's her senior year. She's our last child last year in school. It's her first game of the year, and she felt it important enough for us to miss her game tonight. She's playing right now, to come and speak for her. She would like to speak for herself, but she asked that we come and speak to you and just let you know how frustrating that she does find it. She understands the need for masks. As Keith said, we're not anti-maskers. There are levels of the need for them, and she has reached the point where she would just very much like to be able to enjoy her senior year out on the court with the freedom to breathe, with the freedom to really exert herself as she can and have that ability and not have something hindering her. She watched the Olympics several weeks ago in, as we know, Tokyo, where they completely banned spectators to the indoor sports. And yet the girls on the court, the girls playing volleyball, the ladies and the men playing volleyball, did not have masks. And so she has questions as to why at a high school level we would have masks inside when they did not, under very extreme COVID circumstances. So again, as Keith said, we do appreciate your time and your thoughts on this matter and what you're doing for our community. And we just ask that you would think about the youth, think about the mental health, which is just as important as their physical health at this age. And thank you very much.
And as a side note, the volleyball girls have taken this so serious that it's my understanding that all but one are vaccinated. And I think that speaks volumes to their interest in their own well-being as well. But anyway, thank you. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next is Brian Ingle.
And if you would state your name and address, please.
Yes, it's Brian Ingle at 947 Manitou Avenue. I represent a store in Manitou, the Eagle Dancer, and I have had several people just in the last couple days explain to me that only half of the businesses are complying with the mandate. And just on my way over here, I took note of several businesses just on one side of the street walking over here. My big question is, why do we have a mandate if only half of the people are even going to comply? And are there going to be any repercussions for those that don't? It's incredibly infuriating when I'm getting people who are incredibly disgruntled because I asked them to wear a mask. I've had people verbally abuse me just in the last 2 days. And I have a staff completely comprised of females, and I'm genuinely worried for their safety and their mental well-being. And all of this is just really upsetting because we either should have the mask mandate and enforce it or not do anything at all, because it just seems rather silly to have people do whatever they want. And keep in mind, I'm not anti-mask, I'm not anti-vaccine, I'm very pro. I have a blood disorder myself. My wife has a heart condition, and my live-in mother-in-law is diagnosed with spinal cancer. So we are doing everything we can to keep ourselves safe. And it's because of that is why I'm incredibly upset about all these businesses. And if you'd like, I can even give you the names of just the ones I've seen on the way over. Thank you very much. I appreciate this chance to speak, and I yield my time.
Thank you, Mr. Hinkle.
Okay, our next, it says Kalina.
Good evening, and a reminder, yes, get close.
Good
Thank you.
evening. My name is Kalina Jones. I'm a student at Manitou Springs High School, and I live 514 Arapahoe Drive, 80905.
Could you repeat your address again? Sorry.
514 Arapahoe Drive, 80905. We are here today in hope to bring from a message of student council at the Manitou Springs High School. We composed a message for you guys. And we are here today to explain why, in our opinion, face masks bring much more harm than good to students. Students were told that they were no longer required not long ago to wear a mask. This brought feelings of relief, joy, and longing that we had been hoping for. Finally, a normal year with no restrictions, normal, we thought. A year where we can see each other and better get to know one another instead of seeing only their eyes. Teachers were finally going to be able to teach to a face instead of a mask, and maybe we would actually be able to hear them and engage in our learning. And now, without warning, those feelings of hope vanished. Kids and teachers alike are all devastated for another year filled with restrictions. What caused this sudden change, and why so drastic? A lot of us spent all summer long with each other at school with no masks, working out in the weight room and gym. Stuco worked in classrooms, making posters and getting ready for the new school year. No reported cases came from any of those activities. Many of us are vaccinated. To top it off, imagine the frustration we felt when we discovered that this mandate doesn't start until after Manitou's big moneymaker, the Pikes Peak Marathon and Ascent. So it really makes you wonder, is this really about the safety of others? It seems unlikely when just the day before, thousands gathered in town to enjoy, participate in the actual event itself. People flock to restaurants without masks and spend a good bulk of time in large groups. How will that help COVID cases? Since January of 2021, there have been 5,334 cases in children
1 minute.
and adolescents aged 10 to 19-year-olds. 109 of those were hospitalized, and 2 of those resulted in death. Why then was a decision made to put a mask mandate in place for high school students who have the choice to get vaccinated? Sure, it can be argued that middle schoolers and elementary schoolers need that extra protection because not all of them are yet or able to be vaccinated, but most high school students are eligible. If parents and students chose to not get vaccinated when given a choice, then it's just that. Why are we punishing people who chose to be vaccinated? It seems that at this point in the pandemic, the risk would be transferred to the individual and or the family. Students have already lost so much to COVID, and taking their right to choose whether or not they want to wear a mask is frustrating. When masks are enforced again, this is what students will remember losing. Homecoming dances being canceled, football being canceled, clubs being limited, girls basketball getting quarantined, volleyball not being able to participate in finals due to a quarantine situation, and so many more high school experiences. Masks don't just bring a feeling of discomfort. Have you ever tried to play basketball in a mask? They bring feelings of so much more. We can't see each other. You're taking away our ability to find the joy in a smile, to create a connection with the teacher, to be able to clearly hear each other, and to have true, meaningful relationships. Wearing a mask is so much more than it's being laid out as. What about our mental health?
Thank you. Very well stated.
Okay, and the next one is John Harris.
Welcome.
There you go, it's green. Thank you. Very well spoken. My name is John Harris. I live at 347 Crystal Hills Boulevard, Manitou Springs, Colorado, 80829. I'm pro-freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and I'd just like to read a little something to you related to the Nuremberg Code of 1947. Furthermore, by requiring children to wear a mask, you are promoting the idea that the mask can prevent or treat a disease, which is illegal, deceptive practice. It is unlawful to advertise that a product or service can prevent disease unless you possess competent and reliable scientific evidence substantiating that the claims are true. The FDA Emergency Use Authorization for surgical and or cloth masks explicitly states that advertising must not state or imply that the mask is intended for antimicrobial, antiviral protection or related, or for the use such as infection prevention or reduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
That was the last green request card.
Okay, thanks, Judy. Was there anyone else that wanted to have their say? Yes, sir. Yeah, go ahead.
I just comment? I just got a text from a resident stating that they cannot hear, so if you could just really speak right into that mic. Thank you.
Most people who know me know I'm very loud, so no problem. My name's Justin Armour. I live at, what is my address? 8 Crystal Park Place. I'm the owner of the Crystal Park Cantina, and I'm also a high school girls basketball coach. Really appreciate your guys' time. I know this is a very difficult time. It's very emotional for a lot of us. Heard some emotional responses from the kids today. As parents, it's hard not to get frustrated. And like the gentleman said earlier, I truly believe that the intent here is to, to help people for safety. I just wanted to give you a snapshot of what a basketball practice is like with masked athletes. From a practical standpoint, it's very difficult. I'd say most people in here are pretty critical thinkers. You guys certainly are because you're here. But to watch a masked basketball practice and not come away from it feeling like an imbecile is hard to do. Like the gentleman said, you start one way, but by the end of it, you've touched your mask so many times, you've pulled it up, you pulled it down. It has now become part of the germ warfare going on pretty much. Not to mention in most sports, you're passing a ball back and forth the entire time. So regardless of how effective the idea of mandating a mask for athletes, the reality of it is just symbolic. There's no actual, I can barely keep mine on. Imagine, until you need the kid to hear something, then you pull it down and scream in their face because they've said what 10 times. So at the end of the day, at the end of the practice, the game, regardless of what the intent was in the beginning, the mask has essentially become an additional germ-holding device. If anything, it's creating more spread, in my opinion, watching it happen. So while I appreciate
1 minute.
the effort behind what's going on, the reality of what's happening on the ground when you watch it happen, it's ridiculous, pretty much. And that's how most people feel. That's how the athletes feel, the coaches feel, the referees feel that way. In that particular environment, I know in the hallways, it's fairly much the same as well. So on one level, you have the idea of safety, but in the reality, there is no safety from it. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I just, again, wanted to thank everyone for coming out tonight and sharing your opinion. It leads to a very robust and helpful dialogue, I think, so thank you. I did have one other question from one other business that I did want to bring up with council, and that is from Patsy's. They asked if they were considered indoors or outdoors with all the windows open at the counter. So I just wanted to know how we want to define. A Matt Carpenter shop would be similar, although there's usually only one person in there. But how do people want to answer that question? Julie?
I think indoor is indoor. I can't imagine saying, oh, if you have at least, X number of square feet of open windows, then you're not really indoors. That's my opinion.
Other comments?
I think we have to keep this fairly simple, so, we don't make too many exceptions, and then we are getting more and more questions. You know what I mean? It's just, I think indoors is indoors and outdoors is outdoors, and I think we just should keep it at that. Thank you.
Okay, John or Natalie, anything?
I'm comfortable with moving forward this way at this time. I'm comfortable with supporting Julie and Judith at this time.
Okay, great. So we have a definition, and that's another thing that we'll be definitely looking at is when we remove, not just for the school, what the threshold is to remove for the school, but for the entire community. So there's lots of consideration. So with that, is there any other discussions from council members on COVID-19? Okay, then I would ask for a motion to adjourn from the special meeting and enter into our joint work session with the Planning Commission.
So moved.
Further discussion? If not, all in favor? All right, thank you. Again, thank you everyone for coming this evening. Judy, you're gonna switch us around?
Oh, well, I was just letting Mayor approach the unfortunate that I'm going to be signing off because I have another meeting to go to, so I'm going to leave you without me for the rest.
Okay, great. Did you hear that, Mayor Pro Tem? Okay, so Jeff Parker said he's signing off now.
Yeah, and why don't we take 5 minutes while we reset up here? Oh, Jen, actually, you guys are here in person. I didn't even recognize you. Okay, great. If you guys would come on up as well. Alan, if you want to come over here, that would be great.
You're making me be on the right?
The right-hand side.
So I assume you got all your petitions?
I did. Did you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, got it all in.
I'm going to take a minute, just run to the back.
That's fine. Yeah, I said 5 minutes, so. We'll pick up again at 1:45. Okay, if we could reconvene, I'll go ahead and call this work session to order and welcome the members of the Planning Commission who are here this evening. And are we supposed to have a roll call for this as well? Yeah, okay. So, Alan, I'll let you start with Planning Commission.
I have to turn it on. Hi, I'm Alan Delwich, and I'll start. Commissioner Storm.
Present.
Commissioner Latimer.
Present.
Commissioner Armstrong. Is that it? That's it. Okay.
Okay, then Mayor Graham is excused. Councilor Chandler?
Present.
Councilor Shada? Councilor Wolf? Here. Councilor Johnson?
Here.
And Counselor Bremner is excused. He's in Bolivia, if anyone's interested. So it was amazing that he called in for the first part of it. So, all right, with that, I'll start off, Commissioner Dulwich, if you'd like to say anything on tonight's proceedings.
Sure. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about uses in commercial zones, and then we're going to have a pretty interesting discussion about mobility. And the major component of what we're going to talk about is parking. And that's one of the most commonly discussed topics at Planning Commission meetings. Parking, parking, parking. We have requirements, and we're just looking now at other ways we can go, and we'll probably end up talking about the history of some of the things, how we got where we are. So it should be a very interesting discussion.
Thank you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jen, as I understand you're leading the discussion fully
leading the
tonight.
charge tonight.
You're it, yeah,
So-
yeah, okay.
All right, well, thanks for having us back. Feels like just yesterday that we were here talking about the last topics, so this is exciting to keep this momentum going. Can I go a little closer? I guess since you have a mask on, I don't have to worry about eating the mic. All right, so let's just dive in. As Ellen said, we're going to talk a little bit about use standards, just finish up our conversation from last time, a couple of uses that were brought up towards the end of the conversation. Dive into mobility, natural hazards, and then some closing and next steps. So as we presented last time, here's our checklist of items that we're working through from the priorities from the assessment report. So we've checked a few off the list from our last couple of meetings, and now we're down to parking and our natural and geologic hazard areas. So. All right, as far as the use standards go, towards the end of the last meeting, it was brought up the question of how we might handle small-scale manufacturing and pop-up stores. ADUs were also mentioned. We're trying to get a meeting with the Housing Advisory Board before we bring that forward, so we can work through some recommendations with them prior to meeting with you all. So hopefully that will happen before our next work session, and we can dive into that. Small-scale manufacturing, we've talked about including that in some of the new commercial zone district standards. Some of those, or as industrial uses, and some of those uses could entail breweries, distilleries, wineries, contractor and contractor storage, light manufacturing, carpentry, woodworking, outdoor display, and workshop. We are working on definitions for all of these. And starting to look through how they might apply to the existing commercial zone district and those 4 new commercial zone districts. So I'm going to move ahead here to our little table. This was our proposal for how these new uses might roll into the new zone districts. So destination tourism, it felt, fine to have studios, breweries, outdoor display, possibly even carpentry and woodworking, but keeping out your light manufacturing industry, your contractor storage, those type of items. The Becker's Lane commercial is really geared towards neighborhood commercial, so we were proposing uses that were much more low intensity in that area.
Jen, could you say what P and C are defined as?
Oh, yes, thank you. Oh, attacked by a fly. Yes, thank you. So P is permitted and C is conditional use. There are levels of permitted and levels of conditional use, but those are the 2 basic uses. Yes?
Does this reflect recommendations, or does this reflect what we already have?
These are new uses and new zone districts, so this reflects recommendations.
Okay, thanks.
Yes. And any thoughts on this are welcome. We kind of took our first crack at it and would like to have a discussion about this. So, yes.
I know you said definitions are coming, but could you please define outdoor display?
Yeah, so outdoor display is when you have, say, you have a product such as pottery or something where you can have a display of your product outdoors. And it's different than outdoor storage, so there's definitely some different idiosyncrasies with that.
Yes.
I'm sorry, but I don't understand this. What is studio? What are we, studio
Okay.
and then a P in destination tourism? Can you
Yeah,
know,
I'm gonna go
help
back a
me? I have
slide
no
here.
idea what this chart is supposed to even mean.
So-
So if you could help people like me who aren't so chart-oriented to know what is this supposed to represent,
No
that would help me.
worries. Yeah, so in the code right now, Julie, each zone district has a list of permitted uses and conditional uses. We're taking all of those and putting it into a use table. So each use that's been listed throughout the code now will be down the side of a table, similar to this one, except it's much more expanded. And then all the zone districts will be listed at the top. And then whether they're permitted or conditional will be placed in those boxes. It's just an overall cross-check in the code so that you can look down the code and say, okay, I'd like to do a brewery. What zone districts are those allowed in?
So what is, I thought a studio, what is a studio?
So let me go back a slide here.
I know what a brewery is, but I thought a studio was an apartment with no separate bedroom.
Okay.
Okay, so
Sure.
I just need you to spell it out, please.
Yeah, so in this particular case studio, we're looking at an art gallery or an art studio, photography studio. So again, we're still working on some of the wording on these, and the definitions that go along with them do help describe what they are. Yes, Alan?
Yeah, I'm curious about this contractor and contractor storage. Did you have someone ask you for that, or is it just something you thought was cool? I'm not sure what the motivation was for that.
Yeah, some of these were in the existing code. Was that one in the existing code? I don't believe it was. I believe that was a new use. I thought it was. It was existing? We're going to look and see if it's in your existing code. Some of these were in the existing code already. We just pulled them all together to show you kind of what could constitute these small manufacturing type uses.
Okay.
Yeah, contractor and contractor storage is a standard use in many communities. So the other thing that we've
In
done,
this community, is it in our permitted uses?
we're looking right now.
Okay. Yeah, I just make the comment that one of the challenges we have in Manitou is that probably at least half the residential dwellings are adjacent to or within 100 feet or 200 feet of a commercial zone.
Yes.
Trucks pulling out and backing in and backing out, the beep, beep, beep. We get enough of that from construction. I would hate to invite that type of use into our community if it's not already there. And it might be something we want to consider changing because it is pretty disruptive to the residential character of our community.
Sounds good. Yes, Natalie?
I just had, so the West End residential mixed use, I know that, I'm not sure how functional the bottling plant is at this point, but I've had a number of people dream about having a distillery at that location, things like that. So I was just wondering if that location, there was someone else who was interested in doing some bronze and metal work in that
Okay.
space. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity potentially.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. Conditional use. Yeah, those are the applications that come all the way through Planning Commission and City Council. Yeah, yeah. All right. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
This
Go ahead.
chart would help me a lot better if it showed current as well as recommended
Okay.
instead of just recommended. It's just overwhelming.
Okay, Melissa's going to answer your original question.
Okay, so the carpentry and woodworking shop is an existing use, but the contractor and contractor storage was listed as a definition, but not as a defined use. So it was within the code, but there were quite a few uses when we went through the definitions and the existing kind of lists of allowed uses that were either not defined or the vice versa where they were defined, but they weren't listed anywhere as either permitted or conditional. So that was one of the ones that was defined but not listed. And then the carpentry and woodworking was the opposite. It was listed but not defined. The outdoor display is a new one. The light manufacturing industry was a combination of a couple different types of uses. The brewery, I believe you have, and then the studio is a combination of the existing art studio and photographic studio, which you have listed, so we combine that into a single use, since they have kind of a similar intensity and density.
And also, to Julie's point, we have a full, and this is what Melissa's using right now, we have a full use table that we've developed that will be coming to you for our next conversation, so. And it will show new uses. We have different color coding to show existing, new, kind of things that were tweaked, so, yes.
I have a question about
Sure.
the code. I think it currently says if a permitted use is not identified, then it's not permitted. We're not required to think of all 10 million
Correct.
potential non-permitted uses and state them. So to your point about contractor and contractor storage, did I understand you correctly in stating that that is defined in our code and it is not listed as a permitted use? In other words, it's not a permitted use. Is that correct? Because you seemed like, oh, it's not listed as permitted, but it's not listed as unpermitted, so we don't really know. But am I correct? Because I'm going by memory.
Yeah, it is a defined use, but it's not listed as a permitted use anywhere.
And our code says if it's not listed as a permitted use, then it's not permitted. Am I remembering that part right also?
Typically, codes do leave a little door open for
Well, I don't want
planning
to hear
administrator.
typically. I
but-
want to know. If you don't know,
Yeah.
that's okay.
Okay,
I don't care about typically. Okay.
yes, Mr.
Thank you.
Armstrong.
Thank you.
Well, Manitou construction is one of our major industries right now. And we have had contractor yards. There was one on Crystal Park Boulevard. I think it's still there. I'm not quite sure. But to me, it's better to have it in the code and be able to regulate it than for planning commission to be faced with having to address a question where that contractor has a legitimate need, the community has a legitimate need, and it's not addressed. So.
And maybe it needs to change to a conditional use rather than a permitted use so that it can be, go through that full process.
Yeah, I think if we don't put it in the permitted use, by definition, it is a conditional use. And historically, what we've done when something isn't a permitted use, our planning staff has sort of looked and tried to see, well, is there something similar? It feels like this. And
Yes.
sometimes that's been sufficient. Other times, we do end up with a conditional use, which is okay. That's our process. And what I'm curious, on another item, the light manufacturing and / industry, I'm comfortable with that in certain contexts, but I think we might need to have a section defining it and maybe putting some requirements. One of the issues that we've had in the past is noise. And, you can have the hardcore noise ordinance of 110 decibels, but there's times where other looping, annoying noises can really be grating for neighborhoods. And right now, in my neighborhood, there is a manufacturing facility, and as long as the doors are closed, they're fine. If they're not, there's a whining of a sander, saw, so on all day long. And while it doesn't affect me personally, I know the people who live within 100 feet of it probably get tired of it. So it just might be nice to have some criteria to impose.
Yes, absolutely, and that was our intention with all of these uses. Any use in the use table that is listed as a conditional use has criteria associated with it. So typically, light manufacturing would have noise, noise, dust mitigation, smell, what I'm trying to think, mitigation of noxious materials and storage of things. So, so there would be a set of standards that would go along with that need to be met for it to be allowed in any zone district. Great. Julie?
Are we at the place where we're supposed to comment on what we like, what we don't like, or are we supposed to just be understanding the chart?
we can pause throughout this whole thing. This is a great spot to really talk about what we like and don't like.
Okay, then personally, I would be I don't want the contractor and contractor storage or the light manufacturing. I wouldn't want that next to my house. So, and I think most people wouldn't. If it was, noisy and trucks and materials and customers and whatever. So I'm not happy with having the P next to those.
Okay?
I don't know what a workshop is, so I guess unless I knew what it was, I wouldn't be comfortable with that either.
Julie, I have a question for you. So
Yeah.
are you bothered by them the Ps being in their C3 and C4 zones?
Yes, potentially, because I don't know, as Alan said, there are so many residences that are close to the commercial areas that I don't know. For example, on the East End, if we have some big noisy thing and then we're supposed to have affordable housing right next door, or, so I would want to see a plan to see if that fits in with our vision for that area, because right now, if we keep these Ps in there, I don't think anybody would want to live in those two areas.
Jen, my sense is that you are going to define these a lot more, and
Yes.
that will help us. And I would say it seems to be premature to have the Ps in there at this point until we have strict definitions of the uses.
Perfect.
I think that the format is useful, but without the definitions, it's really hard for us to advise.
Great.
That would be my sense.
Yeah, even just getting kind of this temperature reading tonight helps us with some guidance so we can take that to the next step. So, yeah. If everyone's okay, we'll go ahead and move on to the next one. Or do you want to?
Denise?
Oh, Denise.
Can I just ask a question? The
Sure.
P means permitted, so it's only short term, is that correct?
No, it means it's an allowed use in
It's
that
allowed
zone
use.
district.
So when you say contractor and contractor storage, does that also include, like, we're using maps on the east end and we're using some storage for the contractor? Does that include that? Because we would need that at some point as we're doing projects.
Okay, so you're talking more of a temporary during a construction project. That would be separate from this. Yeah, thank you. All right, the other one that did come up was pop-up shops, and we have not seen this one, to be honest, in a lot of communities, so it was definitely a new use that came to our attention. I've seen it done in communities, but we haven't seen it in a lot of codes brought up. So I thought I would bring forward kind of what we know about pop-up shops, make sure we understood the question correctly, and see if this is something we want to add to the uses or if it's something that is not desired. So typically a pop-up shop is a store, restaurant, or event with a short duration. So a lot of times it can be your kiosks in a mall or something to that effect, or sometimes I think we've been seeing them in vacant storefronts where, a new business or even a retailer of some sort can fill that space temporarily without having, the full space update. So again, seasonal retail, one-time events, short-term is kind of the key there. So oftentimes, like I said, restaurant, retail, they can be outdoor music. So there's kind of a broad range of what they can be. And then, permitting them can be through a temporary use permit. And you can allow, like we've talked about all these others, we can develop standards that would be associated with them. So are we still thinking that we want to add this use to the code, or where are we at on that? Yes, Julie.
Well, I remember last time there was concern about, I think we already allow, if it's already allowed as a restaurant, you don't need special permission if you want to be a restaurant for 5 months instead of for 5 years. You just leave. So I don't know that that's a special permit. But when it comes to food trucks or things that are not in a building, there was concern raised last time about if that makes sense for us.
Right.
Because we have all these businesses that have to pay rent, And then you have all these food trucks that come in during the high season when everybody makes their money. And they have no rent or nominal. And I don't know what the outcome of that is, and maybe that's something we can get some input in, for. But that would be a concern about the food truck. But if we're talking about someone going in for a short duration into a restaurant or an art gallery and they plan on being there for 4 months instead of a year, I don't see why that's a code rewrite issue. I'm confused about that. Can you explain that part?
It was a use that was brought up in our last meeting, so we went ahead and researched it to see if we do need to have different regulations for it. I would say if a retailer were to come in and, I mean, it does bring up a question, because I see a lot of times where jewelers, jewelry makers or card makers sell their product in a little like a little stand right inside a coffee shop, but it's not associated with the coffee shop and it's not consignment, it's them setting up their space. I would think that could be an agreement between them and the retailer. So I don't know that it needs to be in the code. I'm kind of putting that to you guys to say, do we need to have a permit application process for any of these, or do we kind of leave it open to, especially if it's a vacant storefront and you wanted to sell your product in there for a short term while you're figuring things out. I really don't know what the answer is, so. I could see benefits to both. I could see benefit to leaving it out and seeing if it becomes an issue. If applications start to come in, we can kind of have this in the back pocket and for you to add later. Or we can add regulations, either way.
If both uses are permitted and they're in the same space, so we already allow restaurants and we already allow sale of pottery, and they happen to be in the same building, I don't think we need any special laws to say, by the way, that's cool with us. I mean, I don't know. I'm more concerned about the part here with the food trucks, and like you were saying, if there was an outdoor kiosk or some kind of temporary outdoor space, that's where there was a question. I don't know if the chamber would weigh in to help us, but there was some question about if that would, be beneficial to the city overall.
Sure. I think I saw a hand over here.
Yeah, I think what we were talking about was more like, let's talk about a Christmas market.
Okay.
So a Christmas market wants to set up in Memorial Park for 3 weeks. Would we allow that? And I think that is, I think, what you're kind of getting at, more than setting up in an existing storefront. But I think the Christmas market or an Oktoberfest market or something like that, that's going to be here more than a day. Or, and I go back to Julie's original point, which is we have so many stores in town that would be losing out on revenue that I don't know that would be a business we'd want to be in necessarily, but
and we did,
opinion.
when we were looking through this, we were thinking, all these things take away from the brick and mortar that we heard about last time. So
Right, there you go, sorry.
Yeah. Yes, Alan.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think one of the things we were debating last time was where they would be appropriated. And the second bullet you have, or third bullet saying the underlying use must be allowed in the zone where the building is located, makes it more comfortable to me. That means we're not going to have a t-shirt shop showing up next door to some residence. It'll have to be in a zone where that's allowed. And I agree with Julie, if it's a permitted use, it's like pop-up is just a way to say it's a short-term use of that place. Again, the food trucks or the mobile stuff is where it gets really challenging and uncomfortable for the people who invested in the community. And I think we have to really think carefully if that's something we want.
Okay. One thing we can do actually after hearing that discussion is just add to the food trucks use that we have any other mobile sales, because it could be sales of other products that are mobile in nature, and put it under the same requirements as a food truck. I'm getting some head nods over here. Would that work? And then everything else, to your point, would just be subsequent to the use that's already there and might not need any additional zoning requirement.
I don't think we currently have food trucks as a permitted use. Am I remembering that right?
I think what I heard was that on a restaurant property, it's permitted. There was the restaurant down there that used to be called the Stagecoach, and they had a truck, and someone complained, and they said, well, no, it's okay. It's allowed because they are a restaurant, they have a restaurant license, and it was on their property.
Great.
We do have the Taba food truck on the premises of the Sunwater Spa, so, it's worth discussing because, again, when we open up Pandora, when we allow one permitted use for one person, then I think it's really critical that we.
Excuse me,
define-
I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Judith.
I think if we have that as a permitted use in one instance in this town, it really does need to be in the code so that everyone's working off the same rules.
Great. Okay. Any other thoughts on this topic?
Well, just in general, I think that we don't want food trucks competing with our businesses.
Right,
So I don't
right.
want you to have to spend 10 hours drafting something about food trucks in Memorial Park if the general consensus is we don't want to expand the code that way. But I guess that's up to you, what you want to
Okay.
spend your time on.
No, I believe the conversation last time led us to that they need to be tied to restaurants or they need to go through a conditional use permit. We all decided the major conditional use. And there's not a whole lot of language that actually goes along with that, so. Natalie, thank you.
Okay, I guess I'm still intrigued by this, and it's more just because I think I see a pop-up as, again, revitalizing an area where it isn't getting energy and attention, or trying to create in our imagination an opportunity that we can't see until it's a reality. And so, I mean, I know sometimes, again, like if they set up an ice skating rink downtown, they want hot chocolate right near it, so they allow a little hot chocolate stand or whatever. But it usually isn't, I don't usually see it as food. I usually see it as something else. And so we may not need to add it, but I am intrigued by the idea that we could look at a space, I don't know what it would be. If we just said, I just can't, Hiawatha Gardens, I just can't see it being used for anything. If there would be a way for us to create a moment that people could walk in and see it, that could be useful when we're making decisions as a community. And we may not need this to be part of that, but I do think that the pop-up opportunity can be useful. So that's all.
Okay, great.
Can I dialogue with you about that? So do you want it to be just a permitted use or something like that where you're talking about kind of an opportunity thing? So if we're down in the URA and we're thinking, wouldn't that be interesting to have some more retail down there than just 420 and a drive-up gas station kind of thing? You know what I mean? That's pretty much what we have down there in terms of retail. So in that particular case, would you be comfortable with it just going through, shall we say, kind of a conditional use process? Or do you want it to be permitted?
And that's where I feel like those nuances, I mean, I think conditional seems great, but again, I mean, digging into like what that actually fully means.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this one?
I would just suggest that you do talk with the chamber about this one in particular.
Great,
And
yeah.
challenges that they've seen. I mean, I know that often if you bring something in, as Natalie said, it generates excitement and activity.
Right.
And sometimes the businesses would be very supportive of something like that. So I
Okay.
think Leslie might have some good input for you on it.
Great. Yeah, that's good feedback. Thank you. All right.
Yeah, I'll
Oh.
just throw out one more thing just
Yeah.
to think about. And
Sure.
one of the problems, or one of the things that people whine about with major conditional uses is it's a two-step process. It goes to the commission for a recommendation, then it goes to council. We have one notion of a minor conditional use which only is associated with short-term rentals. One possibility we might think about is having other categories possibly be minor conditional uses. You know, when, and this is just a thought. I don't know if it'll open up too big a Pandora's box, but, I guess the challenge then would be to define what would be minor, what would be major. But if we could see some subset that would be minor, that might be a possibility. You might be able to, look at what other people have done in that regard.
And that's actually, thank you for bringing that up, Alan, because that was one of my concerns. I was the one who brought pop-ups last time, so,
I knew it was one of you.
is that to get a conditional use permit takes so long. So if you want to do something in an empty storefront at Christmas time or something, or set up I don't know, whatever, it's Valentine's Day by the time you might get it. So, the ease of which you can react to opportunities is, I think, important in this city. So damned if you do, damned if you don't, so.
Okay. Great. Thank you. That was a good conversation. That gives us some framework to work within. All right. Oops, I was ahead of myself. Mobility. So we've been kind of, as Alan mentioned at the beginning, parking is part of mobility, but we've been kind of using this term mobility as per the conversations that we've been having to encapsulate all types of mobility, not just parking. So we're looking at parking, moving people through the town and that type of thing. So we just wanted to kind of put it right out there, what is included in the zoning and subdivision codes within this topic, and what would be addressed either elsewhere in the municipal code or by policy outside of the zoning and subdivision codes. So the obvious ones, your parking requirements for development is within the zoning and subdivision code. Any incentives for parking reduction would fall in that same category. Requirement for vehicle sharing or infrastructure. Bike lanes, sidewalks, and trails fall within the code from the perspective of widths and dimensions and materials and general location. So, for example, if we were looking at Manitou Avenue, let's take the east end, for example, and we want to widen the sidewalks. If you have one individual property owner widen the sidewalk and put in a bike lane, obviously we're left with a funny sidewalk and a funny bike lane. So typically those types of requirements would kind of go hand in hand with in lieu fees, or hand in hand with, it's more of a public-private partnership where the city would actually have to restripe the lanes or put in that sidewalk, but they can request fee in lieu of that from the developers to offset the cost down the road. So that's kind of where the difference between what we can do with the code and what becomes kind of more of a public-private partnership. Management of city-owned parking assets would be not inside the code. Residential parking permits and paid parking, again, outside of the code, outside of the zoning and subdivision codes. Public parking locations, again, that's more of a policy-based situation or decision. Maintenance and upgrades of public infrastructure and financing. You'll see at the bottom, management of city-owned mobility assets. And that's kind of what I was talking about with those bike lanes and sidewalk expansions and so on and so forth. The code can define what width the sidewalk needs to be in a particular zone district, but typically, unless it's a brand new development, that has to be a bit of a partnership to make that happen. So just wanted to kind of set that out so that we know for this conversation what's part of the zoning code and what is outside of that. So per the assessment report, we had these 4 recommendations related to mobility. Assess the feasibility of alternative parking management strategies, such as shared parking, on-site versus off-site parking requirements, on-street parking availability, and maximum parking lot coverage to minimize the need for parking variances. Revise current downtown parking standards as maximums rather than minimums. Update sidewalk terminology and standards. We're actually working on that piece with staff right now. combine existing parking regulations into one chapter and add landscape requirements. So the parking regulations were kind of scattered throughout the code. We're putting those into one section, so any project you work on, you go to that one section, see all of your parking requirements, and include the landscaping component that we've been talking about in previous meetings. So the alternative, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I don't remember. What does it mean when there's a downtown parking standard that is a parking maximum?
Okay, yes. So right now, the code states parking minimums. So there's a minimum requirement. I'm going to throw some numbers out, but say, for example, retail, let's say restaurant. Maybe a restaurant might require 1 space per 300 square feet of restaurant space. That's a minimum requirement. You can obviously go above and beyond that if you want to. A lot of communities are actually going to a parking maximum where they say there's a maximum of 1 per 300 square foot and you can go less. A lot of communities are also just dropping that requirement altogether and stating, if you have a restaurant, you're coming into downtown, you obviously need to accommodate parking, and it's difficult in a downtown because we're very constrained with the land space and property area. And that's where I think a lot of the variances are coming from, because the requirement for the number of parking spaces can't be met on site, but there's public parking that can be utilized. So there's many different ways to skin this cat, and what a lot of communities such as yours who have all the different public parking lots in play already, they're just dropping that requirement for their downtown so that the development can come in. Maybe it's a redevelopment, maybe it's a new use of an existing building, and then they can utilize that public parking as part of their requirement.
So the code would say, if you want to have a restaurant here, that's fine, but you're not allowed to have more than 6 parking
That's
spots?
what the maximum would say.
Why would we ever do that?
That's a really great
I'm missing
question,
something.
so-
That doesn't make any sense to me.
Right.
We don't want you to park. We don't want your customers to park in your parking lot no more than X number. I mean, I understand the minimum. The opposite doesn't make any sense to me. I don't get it at all.
Yeah, it's funny when you put
Why
it that
would
way.
you
And
do
there,
that?
there are a lot of communities that have ranges. They'll have a minimum and a maximum, and I think it's just to target kind of a general range. A lot of big box stores, request a larger amount. You don't have that issue so much here, but it's just a thought. It was a thought that a lot of communities are doing, that they're providing that cap so that we're not adding a lot more paved space when we can utilize our public parking spaces. So again, we could have no minimum, no maximum in the downtown. It could be no requirement, and you need to just provide the parking that you think is needed for your facility. That's what a lot of communities do as well.
I would love to hear, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dave.
Well, speaking from a design standpoint, I could see that we, for example, in the downtown district, we don't want to require people to pave big chunks of what are very small constrained properties in the first place. And then there's the question of viability of a project. So I can see why other communities are moving in that direction.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
So there is a push towards parking maximums, and granted, it is kind of hard to understand why we would want to limit the cars coming in, right? If you open a store, and the idea is that you want to have enough parking for that store. The problem is a lot of these codes, there is really no scientific evidence that the square footage of a facility even matches what the car requirements are. So cities are finally realizing that as we add more parking, we're just really encouraging more cars. This city has to decide if we want to have more cars, or do we want to have a walkable city. We want to reduce pollution. If we require in every store 20 spaces, we're inviting more cars. It's just the way it is. So when a store opens up, they know that there's a maximum number. They're gonna have to be successful, think about how they're gonna provide additional parking, or how they're gonna do incentives to get people to find other ways to utilize their store. In the downtown, it's tough because there is no parking. We have 40 spots, they're almost 100% occupied. So then we also prevent them from even maybe opening a store with parking minimums. So the maximums hold that down and require them to think different ways to have, whether it's transportation mobility options, and not just build more parking space. So if the city wants more parking spots and more pavement and more, then that's what the minimums will do. The maximums have been proven to be very successful. One of the experts in the field, Donald Shoup, his number 2 on correcting the parking problems is parking maximums, not minimums. And I'll be happy to send that out to you all to read about that, because it is a little complicated and hard to understand, and it took me a while to figure out where they're coming at with this. But again, we have to make some big decisions here. We can make the whole Manitou a parking lot and get people to come in, but that's what you're gonna have as a parking lot. So we have to make good decisions. Should the store be there? Does it have available parking for its use? And if it feels like it can, then that's part of the process, is to let the Planning Commission know how they're gonna manage their parking, because there's gonna be maximums. We don't want more parking space to be built all into Manitou. So that's where that comes from. And I'll be happy to send some information on that so it can be read in detail before decisions are made.
Okay, I'd just like to go back over the last 20 years of parking in this community. And historically, people didn't have cars. So a lot of Manitou in the downtown, there's no consideration of parking. No consideration of where to put cars. The way we've managed it over the years, we have something called existing use. You know, any restaurant that's expanded, we've always considered, you know, the existing use. If they had 10 tables, they're going to bring more business in. And we've made some assessments where there needs to be at least some parking provided. And it's worked fairly well, because, you know, most of the buildings, they've been there for 100 years, 50 years, whatever. And it's only those incremental uses. And where it's really important is with the employees. And we pretty much, if someone decides to double their staff because they're really expanding, we say, well, you know, you at least have to have a place for your people to park. And my concern, if we say, oh, we're not going to do that anymore, over the last 18 years, we've had something like 60 requests for parking variances when people have added new uses, and they've, you know, in general, if they have park, it's not like they're bulldozing half the building. That's just facetious nonsense. That's not what happens. But they do. They find someone who has some space, and they'll park. Maybe they'll park in the Prospect lot. They'll buy some passes there. There are ways to do it without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I'm really concerned that, you know, I went back and looked at some of the things from about 10 years ago, and people open businesses and they need 30 spaces, and we figure out a compromise, and they say, okay, well, we'll get parking passes for all our employees. In other cases, they didn't do that. They just, you know, I had a niece who worked at one of the little t-shirt shops, and she, you know, predated some of the RPP, so, well, she just went and parked in front of someone's houses, and it really made it hard for the residents in those neighborhoods. So I think we have to be really, really careful if we just jump to a new paradigm. We can't just do it without really a lot of thoughtful understanding of how we've gotten to where we are.
When we're talking about mobility in this discussion, are you focused solely on retail, or are we also looking at new housing and vacation rentals? Because I know that, you know, with housing, there's been pressure for us to reduce consider reducing the parking spaces for a new build. And I just want to bring, that just compounds the issue that we have with parking downtown. When we have, we are going to have new builds coming in, and we need to consider that residential aspect as part of this mobility also.
Yeah, and the parking standards apply across the board. Single-family residential is a little different than multifamily residential, commercial, and all of the above. But, let me run through a few case studies, because this might get kind of the juices flowing on what other communities are doing. To Alan's point, yeah, let's not just throw the baby out with the bathwater, but there's some other really creative ways to accommodate parking. And thank you very much for describing the overall impacts, because I think that was very helpful. So let's run through these case studies really quick, and then we can keep kind of talking about this conversation. But so we have a few communities here. Silverthorne, they do have a requirement similar to yours, where there's a certain number of spaces per square foot of the building. They will allow up to 50% of those parking spaces to serve businesses to be located off-site. So this could be, somewhat applicable to Manitou, similar to what Alan was saying about either purchasing permits in a lot, or, using creative ways to accommodate that parking to make sure that we're addressing the parking needs. But they would have to be, this particular code had it within 300-foot radius of the subject property. That's pretty tight. I've measured that before, and it may not be realistic, so we may need to look at some different numbers that might work better for Manitou Springs. But you can also do reductions. So there's incentives built in. You can get a reduction for a mix of non-residential use if a peak parking demand occurs at a different time of the day. So that starts to get into shared parking, where you can share your parking. So maybe there's a parking lot that's between a restaurant that has more night use versus the library, and that's probably a horrible example, but that has a more day use, where you can, it's a pretty fair assumption that you're going to have different parking needs at different times of the day, so they can share that parking lot. There always is crossover. You could get a 15% reduction in that parking requirement if the property is within a certain distance of a bus service or transit center. Up to 5% substitution for bicycle parking. We're seeing this across the board right now. If you're, sometimes we're seeing where people provide covered bike parking, or enclosed bike parking, or the enclosed bike parking and some sort of facility for cleanup. If you're an employee, you want to be able to bike to work and take a quick shower before you start your shift or something. So sometimes there's a little bit of that built into it, but not just your public parking racks, but a little bit above and beyond, to allow people to bike to work and have the same consideration as they would with a vehicle. Oops, I was advancing on my computer, not here. Steamboat Springs tailors their parking according to land use and zone districts. So we're talking a lot about the downtown zone district here, because that's kind of where the biggest constraint is. So we could tailor the parking ratios to downtown versus maybe somewhere like the URA that might have a little bit more land for their parking lots. You can get, in Steamboat Springs, you can get credit reductions, again, for on-street parking spaces, and spaces located within a certain distance of transit. So you're going to see these kind of common themes running through here. And that's just a table at the bottom of how they break out their reduction ratio. Steamboat also allows a reduction in parking that serves multiple uses. So again, that's shared parking. So uses that do not normally overlap, no substantial conflicts result in the parking reduction, will not cause congestion or unsightly concentration of parked cars. So again, trying to utilize those parked surface parking so that you don't have, blank parking during the day of a night use facility and vice versa.
Do we have anything like that? I mean, do we have, I'll ask you guys who live here, do we have anything like that where
I think the schools
there's
are a big
a parking lot that's empty during parts, the pool is a good idea.
The pool,
Or
the
the schools are a
schools.
good idea during the summer, the school parking lots.
Another example is the Happy Cats. When they did their development and there was this, thing with the residents at Taos Village, and they determined that there were some places that could be shared.
Thank you. Great. Durango has something a little bit different. They use parking districts. So rather than by zone district, they have a couple of parking districts that are different. So in this case, maybe kind of the Manitou Avenue core could be one district, and then the periphery that's more residential could be your other district, just as an example. They do require less parking than general, and includes regulation for EV and electric vehicle charging and bicycle parking. So you can get parking credits and reductions to reduce that off-street parking impact, again, by providing the bicycle parking spaces. Reducing building occupancy limits, and we looked into that one because that one seemed a bit odd to us. It seems to work for Durango, but it would not be a recommendation that I would make. Reduction of parking requirements, be restricted for age-restricted multifamily. Again, we are finding that age-restricted facilities, typically you do reduce down to one vehicle oftentimes, so that is one, avenue that can be used. And then reduction of parking requirements for adaptive reuse. That's what Durango does, anyway. And they also have a shared parking regulation, again, very similar to the others, where you get certain types of reductions for certain types of uses. So just some different ways to kind of bring that about in the code. So based on all of those, our recommendations would be to maybe look at this parking districts or doing different parking regulations by zone district, implementing the parking credits and reduction, replacement of off-street parking for the bicycle spaces, again, to include that multimodal transit, requirements of self-imposed building occupancy limits. So if you as a retailer say, I am going to reduce the limits of my occupancy so I don't have to have as much parking, then that could be a consideration. The age restricted, the adaptive reuse, and also electric vehicle charging to tie into our sustainability. This has kind of been in the back of our minds, but came to our attention at a URA meeting last week that electric vehicle charging stations are really on the forefront of people's minds. And so providing opportunities that, as a business owner, being able to provide a space for an electric vehicle charging station could give you a reduction of parking spaces. Yes.
We have two really large, what I would call kind of destination attractions. One is the Cog Railway, one is the Manitou Incline. I was up during the Pikes Peak Marathon watching literally dozens and dozens and dozens of people going up Ruxton, which we had removed all the on-street parking. There was signage that the city had downtown that said going up Ruxton is only for residents and for Cog Railway parking. But there was a huge number of people who were coming early for train reservations. So not only did they navigate up Ruxton, okay, through the race traffic and the whole 9 yards, but then they got turned away by the Cog Railway, okay? They were too early. So I would like your thoughts, and is our community just totally unique in this, where we're next to a huge growing, about ready on the cusp to be 1 million people, okay? We, I think as a community, don't want to have these big parking lots. I don't think we want to go in the mode of having a whole bunch of tiny little parking lots that tourists and whatnot have to try and find where that parking is and develop more of those. So one of the examples was the Cog Railway came in the spring and said, we're going to do about 130 parking spaces out of the city and shuttle people in, okay? And I think that is a really good model for us, okay? As an example, the parking that is immediately adjacent to the Cog Railway Station, I think I just took a picture of some signage, and it says 4.5 hours of parking, $15, okay? Now, we have this hiking attraction, okay, which literally doesn't really have one parking place for it itself, okay? All right? So very interestingly, our city staff used kind of some clipboard analysis of having somebody over at Hiawatha Gardens that has, well, this summer, depending upon what we were doing over there, it had 100 parking spaces, or I don't know, whatever it had, something like that. But they basically asked each person who arrived, how many people were in your party, and kind of why are you here, that kind of thing. And it was very interesting that that parking lot largely got used, okay, by this one attraction, okay, which has no parking, okay. So here's a fairly walkable parking lot, okay, that this is how it sort of kind of got used. And then the Cog Railway, for whatever reasons, decided not to implement their out-of-the-city parking, okay, and then directed people to this lot, okay, all right. And so if you go out and kind of look on the reviews and all the stuff, this was sort of kind of varying degrees of frustration in terms of people trying to navigate to this parking lot, trying to utilize kind of shuttles, and they've got this really expensive ticket, $68 for a certain time, okay? All right? This isn't like you just sort of kind of missed the bus to the incline and you were thinking, oh, you know, I was going to start the incline at 11 a.m. or something like that. You just missed your train, and now you're at the counter, you know, pleading with them, can I get on the next train or have some accommodations? So it's, you know, a pretty big kind of mess up, that kind of thing. So I'm curious about how do other communities kind of handle this kind of thing? Do we have other models to look at that are successful so that we can start to figure out and not maybe stumble around in this?
Yeah, that's a really good one. We might have to look into some other communities because that is, your Cog Railway situation and incline is very unique, especially how constrained it is up there. And that was a great story to hear that, you know, like you said, Hiawatha is a great walkable area for the downtown, yet people are parking there and taking spaces to go up. Okay, we can look into some other communities that are addressing that. Yes.
So I'm so glad you brought that up because, you know, if I were to hang my hat on one policy issue, Manitou has these two amazing attractions. Mm-hmm. And not only that, we have a metro shuttle system that we provide, you know, free rides up to incline, hopefully to decrease the amount of car traffic that goes up there. I really think that Manitou, and this may have some nuances in the municipal code, but perhaps it's a different policy. But I would look at Hanging Lake. Hanging Lake,
that's a great one,
right? Was like the incline. People were loving Hanging Lake to death, and finally the city said we can't do this. That Hanging Lake cannot sustain all these people, so they put it in a reservation system. They have dedicated parking. You can only take their shuttle, and the city has done a great thing because they don't use another metro system. They have in-house shuttle systems. They contract with, I guess the closest thing would be like Adventures Out West. If we contracted with a local company and they provided the shuttle service, so it's been a phenomenal success. Now the tourists are saying they love it, and the community's saying they love it. So I think adopting something like that would be really great for our community.
Yeah, that would be great. Do you know if there's any space that the city could dedicate a new parking lot, because the Hanging Lake is a great example. That's a large parking lot. Although they only have, one bus at a time, so I'm just thinking through. I've
Yeah.
been in their system, so I know how it works, and it does work quite well.
Yeah, we sometimes have to think outside the box.
Yeah.
There may not be real estate right in the city, but it could certainly, something outside of the city could still service our needs.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody wanted to have a lot 2 miles away and have a shuttle. One thing I wanted to, before I lose the thought.
Sure.
When we're, with your recommendation slide where you're talking about getting rid of parking minimums. One of the major concerns I have is what's going to happen to existing parking that people have provided over the last 20 to 30 years as we've gotten more successful. Are they just going to turn them all into other attractions? Are they going to add more room, put up some more housing? It just seems like I would guess right now there's somewhere between 100 and 200 off-street parking places adjacent to the Manitou Avenue. If you look on both sides, you look at the hotels, you look in the back of some of the businesses. So if all of a sudden there's no parking minimums, what's going to happen to those? Or how do we prevent just all of a sudden having demand for another 100 or so?
That's a
Parking
really
places.
good thought to think of, and that's part of why we bring up some alternate options where you could keep your parking minimums and do zones, and it might change, the minimum might change by zone. To your point, the parking lots would remain unless a redevelopment application came in or a reuse application came in on those parcels. So they wouldn't just get taken away. But I'm thinking through something you said earlier about the variances, and I would be really interested in knowing the result of a lot of the variances. If the requirement was 1 per 300 square feet and a lot of the variances backed up to a 1 per 200 or allowed, other options, maybe we could codify something that seems sort of standard to allow that.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking is we were talking that we did on a couple of the, bigger restorations for the Cliff House and the spa. And we started looking at the restaurant use. We sort of rationalized, well, someone goes into has a meal, then they walk next door, they go in a t-shirt shop, or they go to the dog shop or whatever, So this hardcore thing of so many square feet means a parking place might be outdated and there might be some way. I think over the years we've bent over backwards to do those rationalizations. But when Julie was on council, on the commission, she'd always say, it's not in the code, you can't do it. And she was right. And so if we could just maybe think of, how to credit those things, do some analysis. Like, I don't think a lot of people drive down to go to a t-shirt shop, but they certainly stop at one on their way from being at some other store. So some creative thinking there to make it a little more consistent in our analysis could really help.
Sure. Great, yes.
Another interesting thing that's sort of happened, and Alan reminded me with the Cliff House. The Cliff House, when it first came on, had sort of kind of this model of a kind of a one-time convenience fee or something like that, that included all your tipping and parking and all this other kind of stuff, okay? And that used to work really well from the standpoint, believe it or not, of people who lived in the neighborhood with regard to parking, because you're going to be interested in what's happened. They have undone that, okay, and now staying at the hotel is a little more a la carte, okay? So now what you consistently see is the parking garage nearly empty. okay? Because people have, and I don't exactly know what their new tariff is for using the garage, okay? Because they don't allow you to park your car in the garage, so it's essentially valet parking, okay? So there's, so it's not like a $5 fee to just use the garage. You've got this valet parking kind of overhead built in it. So this is what's going on, is the entire residential neighborhood that is not RPP protected, okay, every night is starting at about 4 o'clock, this bumpity bump of all of this luggage going down the street, going by a 2-tier parking garage that's almost empty. So when you talk about kind of parking minimums and sort of kind of things like that, this is sort of kind of some interesting things. And I haven't gone back to look and see what their permitted uses are and whether this is sort of kind of a violation, but it's something I just want to point out, that we have a perfectly functional garage, okay, that is not being used for parking almost every single night. It is very sparsely parked.
And it's restricted to hotel guests, I would assume.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I guess, so I'm having a hard time with this too, because I'm looking at like where we are right now, but I think we're on the cusp of so many things. So it's
Right.
like, we're not really planning for where we are now, we're planning for where we're gonna be in 6 months or whatever. And so that's what I'm having a hard time with, is that, we can answer right now that we don't have these lots in other locations, and we don't have a really convenient trolley that's fun and easy to use, and, and so, but I think we're so close that I don't want to necessarily create a plan for today when we're not really going to be here for very long. And so I think that's what's making it tough for us to really dig in. And so I don't know what to do about that, but I don't know if there's like something, again, that triggers, like once we have this, and that triggers maximums versus minimums. Once we have this, that triggers something else, so that we can be a little more adventurous, not quite knowing what's going to happen.
Okay.
Well, and if I could,
Yeah.
I think we've approached mobility through parking almost
Right.
entirely to date. And we've done it in a very incremental way, so that we've kind of painted ourselves into a corner on things. So we can either continue on this incremental, keep trying to fix it in little bits and pieces, or we take a more revolutionary approach and really change things big time. I don't have a clue. I wish I did. But whereas I advised you earlier to talk with Leslie, I think Roy has done, and we also have the issues here, policy versus zoning code,
Right.
which are two different things, and both have huge parking/mobility implications.
Right.
So I think Roy has really been trying to look at this from a very strategic perspective.
Right.
And with the values of the community, because I think somebody hit on it. Our values are, at this point, this council doesn't want, sustainability is very, very important, environmental considerations, and don't convert everything to parking lots.
Right.
So I think those are the driving factors, and I have no creativity on how to fix any of this.
Great.
So that's why we hire consultants to help
Yep.
us with that. So I've heard some really good thoughts here tonight, but, we really need that longer-term thinking on this.
Good.
And just driven by our values as a community.
Good. And we have had a meeting with Roy last time we were here, and we talked quite a bit about this topic. And to both of your points, there are a lot of pieces to this puzzle that aren't in play yet. Say the trolley. If we could get the trolley here and running in a nice loop and, different things like that, that can really change the considerations for the parking requirements. So I think we have to both think into the future and accommodate any applications that come in kind of this interim period where we're getting other policies in place. So, but thank you for that. And I think also, the more I'm listening, my brain is just churning right now with thoughts and ideas. But, you already kind of have a built-in shared parking system in downtown, you know? To Alan's point, most people aren't coming with the destination of a t-shirt shop or the candy shop, maybe the candy shop, but but you stop and have dinner, and as Melissa and I have found, we stop and have dinner, and then we go on down and get a bite of chocolate, and we went in the Christmas store, and, you know, I don't think any of those actually were our destination at all, but, you know, we parked in one place and walked the whole community. That's one person's perspective, but I do think you land upon different things as you're moving through the community. So, yeah. Julie, did you have another thought? You're good? Okay. All right. So it sounds like we're maybe on the right track. We just need to, oh, thank you. Yes.
I guess the other thing that I'd like to say is I think that also we need to figure out ways to really demonstratively reduce the attraction of the trolling for parking and traffic in the downtown zone, okay? All right, and we're trying different kinds of things, but so that's why what really intrigues me is this low-hanging fruit of these two monster truck attractions, in which both currently right now require you to have a reservation for a time slot. One's a really risky thing if you screw up, okay? All right, you may just lose 68 bucks in tax, all right? The other, you know, it's not that big of a deal that you kind of show up an hour late at the incline or something like that, all right? But both those things currently right now, there's no coupling, okay, between this reservation that you're making for this attraction and the parking linkage, okay? All right, there's suggested things about what your options might be when both these attractions basically give you a reservation. They kind of give you some clues and whatnot, send you some emails or some text messages or whatever, okay? And I think, to me, that I think, until we go in Nancy's direction where we're completely breaking the bonds of human beings and automobiles and getting around, okay, to me, still we need to have some kind of coupling, it seems like to me, because otherwise what we currently have right now is this huge amount of trolling for these rare parking spaces, okay? Finding these tiny little small little pocket parking lots that we have scattered around, okay? There's lots of trolling for this, and it seems like to me these reservation-oriented things are low-hanging fruit to get people from the get-go, sort of kind of like how you handle things in a little bit at kind of if you go to DIA. You know, you shop around for your parking, but you don't arrive at DIA, okay? Most people don't, I don't think, trolling in all these outlying parking lots, shopping for the lowest rate, shopping for, you know, who's got the best shuttle system and whatnot. You're going to miss your flight, okay? So an awful lot of people come with that already arranged. They know where they're going. They know how that shuttle system's going to work to get them there, okay? And I realize it's not coupled to their ticket, but I'm actually kind of intrigued as to how we could kind of get that more tightly coupled with the reservations that people are using for these two destination things, so that people aren't showing up, okay, looking for scarce parking lots.
And taking up that valuable parking for the uses in that area, yeah. Go ahead.
And I'm just going to bring this up because we're talking about parking and mobility. With those two main attractions, I'm going to just talk about the elephant in the room, and I think with regards to parking and policy regarding parking, we've got to have our stakeholders have more skin in the game, and that's where policy comes in. Manitou has got to work with the stakeholders of the COG and the incline to say, we are partners in this, and Manitou is going to partner with you so that you follow through with your remote parking lot during this high season of the year, and these are the number of parking spaces that you need to provide, And then you will need to get your people here via a shuttle and perhaps the incline as well, that we've got to talk about. Like, Councilor Shada said, we're next door to a city that's just growing exponentially. And so we're just going to have those conversations with our stakeholders that we can't absorb all that. I don't know how other residents feel, but most of the residents in my neighborhood wouldn't think of driving into Manitou during tour. I mean, I would not drive my car into Manitou. That would be crazy. I'm going to walk or ride my bike because that would be a horrible experience. And I don't want our visitors to have horrible experiences and be trolling for a parking space and then leave town because they're so frustrated. So those are some of the things that, I want to remind just everybody in the chamber too, that cars don't spend money. People spend money. Cars come in, they transport the people, but really cars bring with them environmental concerns, not only the parking, but the maintenance of the parking, right? All of that. And so I think that we have to think about so outside of the box for this little town because we're just getting loved to death. And that's, it's not sustainable. It's just not sustainable.
Great.
Yeah, I just, we're getting sort of veering off into policy and getting away from zoning, but I think a good way of thinking, I don't think there's anybody in Manitou that would like to see fewer cars driving around. And I always think of the model like I used to have a condo in East Vale. I'd park the car and I never would think of driving to Vale Village. There was a shuttle that came every 15 minutes. And if we somehow get that into the mix of our thinking and, arch shuttle or something and people ditch their cars and they're glad they don't have to go, and especially those people from Nebraska and Kansas, they're not thrilled with the parallel parking and even the back-in parking at maybe, or certainly down in the commercial area, there are going to be parallel parking. So the less we have to do it, the better.
Great. Thank you, guys. I do want to just, I don't want to keep talking about this, but I do want to clarify. It does sound like maybe parking maximums were kind of, we just need to find some creative way to get there. So let me move on to this next slide. This was our first attempt at maybe defining some parking districts based on uses more in the heavier retail type areas. So like I said before, we have options here. And I just want to kind of get a feeling if maybe this might be the right direction to go, either doing parking districts or by zone district, which would be very similar to this because we are now going to have our downtown zone district, our west end zone district, our east end, and our URA. So each of those could have their own kind of parking regulations as far as maximums or minimums just based on their geography and natural kind of constraints. So does that sound kind of like the way we wanted to skin this cat a little bit, be a little bit more specific kind of to the uses of the areas, and be creative about how we accommodate that parking and really, I think we really want to try to encourage that multimodal transportation, but we also need to accommodate the cars that are coming to our community now. So
I like that. I like it a lot.
Okay. Kind of a parking district type model and tailor.
Because again, that idea of the maximum downtown makes sense to me, but then also,
Right.
again, the different areas potentially having different needs.
Okay.
That looks.
I'm not in favor, I'm sorry. I'm not in favor of removing the minimums. I think that would be a nightmare. I can't imagine. And the other thing I want to say is, and I don't know how much my comment is a policy thing, it's not regulations, what I'm about to say, but it affects perhaps the regulations, is, if we get to a place where we say we are not allowing bus route 33 to go up Ruxton Avenue anymore. It's too noisy, it's too crowded, the residents hate it. If you want to get to the incline, or if you want to get to the COG, then, go to some parking lot in Colorado Springs that the COG and the Incline can buy together, and they'll shuttle you here, and then they'll take you back. And if we eliminated those thousands of cars a day, we would have a very different situation here. It would be like COVID. It was awesome. We had businesses open in July. We had plenty of places to park. The COG and the Incline were closed, and the residents were in heaven. You could actually hear the birds on Rexton. So, if we make certain decisions in the future that we want these two attractions to, shuttle their own people in, we're not going to let you. Right now, they pay for that bus because we were like, we don't want to pay for that. We'll pay for it. No, we don't want anyone to pay for it because we don't want that bus going up that road. Then we would have a very different situation. So when we talk about zones, I just don't want to focus on the zone. I want to focus as well on what is the business, because for those two businesses, at least for me personally, I think they need to provide their own out-of-city parking, and that would just have such an impact. Anyway, but thank you.
Great. No.
I would like to just, continue to explore the maximums. I
Okay.
think that, again, I'm beyond incremental steps. So I'm not saying throughout the minimums. But I would also like to try to get everyone to stick to zoning as opposed to into policy. I think we do have. Okay, my apologies then. I thought. My apologies. I just like to keep on zoning, and I'm looking at the time, so
Sure.
I'm always.
Absolutely.
But this is a very important topic.
Yeah.
So.
I
Yeah,
just have one more thought for the, I'm open to reading papers and understanding. I also have my own use cases from places that have thrown them out, and trying to go to a concert and missing it because I had to go and move my car because they didn't consider where people would park for the venue. But with the periphery districts, I assume what you're talking about are residential districts. And I definitely think we need to keep minimums there. And something we might start thinking that is not in our code now is when you have a development like say a townhouse project where it's breaking new ground and putting new stuff in. Right now, the only thing they have to provide is 2 parking places. And, a lot of them say, oh, well, and you can park in front of your garage. Well, people fill their garages. So I think to maybe think about, maybe there's a trigger point, more than 4 units, you have to provide X amount of guest parking too. Because I know a couple of the projects that have come recently, when people are all moved in there and decide to have a party, there's going to be a real challenge for all those people to know where they're going to park. And some of them are in areas, some areas, well, there's a lot of streets you can park in in front of all your neighbors, but in some other projects that are ongoing or may be coming, there is no parking other than on very busy, dangerous streets. So maybe just think about that element for the projects.
Great.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Roy has a question.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
I just know when we had our meeting, we also talked about a hybrid
Yes.
of minimum and maximums.
Mhm.
And I'm glad we brought this up because it's important to know what the community wants. And maybe it sounds like it's more of a hybrid on some minimums, and maximums somewhere in there. So thank you. Yeah.
Great. And I know some communities, like City of Fort Collins does a lot of their employment or office space uses based on the number of employees or number of anticipated employees rather than square footage. So there's many other metrics we can use for the different use types and break it down a little bit further than just if you're retail, you're this, if you're restaurant, you're this. We can build in some more tailored metrics for that.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay, I understand the parking maximum dilemma is essentially chiefly this kind of situation where in suburban areas, big box retailers, Home Depot, Costco, or whatever, will buy an exceedingly large parking lot and try and insulate themselves from the other retailers, okay? And because they are so big, they'll buy this huge footprint of parking so that when you park close to Home Depot or whatever, you are like a quarter of a mile away from those tiny little retail shops over there across the way. And this is sort of kind of their intention, is to kind of keep you there. And then, is that not essentially kind of the core of the parking maximum thing? So I'm trying to just relate that to Manitou, that I think that's probably not one of our problems.
It's paired with, in some cases it's that, City of Fort Collins and other communities, it's been more about sustainability and not wanting to have giant parking lots.
Right.
So, yeah. Because even a lot of office spaces will just kind of carte blanche put in more parking than is needed, especially if you have employees bicycling and using other modes of transit. Some other things to consider would be shared parking. You know, if there's, I know there's not a lot of Ubers or different things kind of, but you know, if you do have some sort of ride share situation, accommodating pull-offs for them, you can pair those up with your transit stops sometimes so that you're not having people just in the middle of the road dropping off their clientele. So there's lots of other different things we can kind of work in to encourage other modes of transit. Or, you know, autonomous vehicles are coming, maybe. So, you know, where your vehicle could come drop you off and leave and park in a different parking lot. That would be similar to our situation up at the COG, though, where you might have to provide a parking lot that's kind of tucked behind. So, yeah. Yes.
I'd just like to say very briefly, this is encouraging, particularly what Roy had to say, and I know you've really studied mobility, which is obviously a big concern to all of us, and then you bringing up alternatives. I think it's pretty clear to me that, and you probably have a good sense, that we have a shared set of values here, of which we would like to see realized. We don't have the firepower to figure out the policy decision. The ultimate decisions will be up to council, but that's why we're paying you all this money, which is probably not nearly enough. But I think it's clear that what we have now is not working very well. And when you bring up these alternatives, and the three communities you mentioned, Silverthorne and Durango, that's very encouraging to me. So keep going. I mean, I agree completely with Alan. We don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. And sometimes you have unintended consequences. But people have been dealing with this and having some success. Let's take advantage of it.
Right. Great. All right. In the interest of time, why don't we move on to our next topic? Because, well, we do have a slide about landscaping, but we have talked about this before, about adding you know, a certain number of trees per parking space and so on. So I think we're going to skip past this one for now. I think we've pretty well vetted this one in the past. But I do want to move on to natural hazards. This one is a lot. It's a lot to get our heads around and is very technical. So in the interest of time, I think I can kind of give you the 10-second version of this, and we can just have a quick conversation. But basically, your standards are actually quite well done. They were just revised in 2019. We took a look at them in comparison to some other communities. Many communities have development constraints at 25 or 30% slope. You have the 30% slope prohibition. Established limits of disturbance for wildfire, steep slopes, floodplains, streams, drainage, and tree cover, also seen in a lot of other communities. You have a tiered system for the geologic hazard evaluation. The trigger point in Manitou is 17%, and I'm not sure. We've tried to do some research to find out where that exact number came from. A lot of other communities are more at the 10 to 12% range. So that might be one area that we could look at if it needs to be tightened up or not.
You can ask Karen Burchell.
Okay.
This is her baby.
Great. We will talk to Karen about that one. She hadn't mentioned it to us in the past, so thank you for bringing that up. So in our opinion, this tiered system it works. There's a lot of other communities that do a tiered evaluation system. It could be a little spelled out maybe a little bit more clearly, or use some flow charts or something to explain, the trigger points for the tiered system for an applicant. Let's see. We had some recommendations in the assessment report. We've talked a little bit last time about requiring a limit to the impervious surface. So putting a max on, only 80% of the site or 70% of the site can be covered in paving and rooftops and everything, and the rest needs to be pervious. Again, that process graphic could help with the tiered system. Let's see, codify cluster development regulations. You do have some cluster development regulations now, but we could kind of, they're more of a recommendation or a encouragement, so we could change that to stronger language if we would like to. We have been reviewing the City of Colorado Springs Drainage Criteria Manual. It's used as a reference document, so we're trying to see if that's still applicable. And we are working with trying to reach out to the fire department to see if there's any additional wildfire mitigation standards. We are writing wildland urban interface standards for a lot of communities, so we'll kind of keep that dialogue open and make sure that any of that gets rolled in as needed. But let's see. I'm just gonna skip past a couple of these. So basically, Thurston County has an LID standard for, like I said before, it's kind of an impervious surface maximum requirement. These are some example tables or flow charts that we could expand your existing tiered system flow chart to kind of give a little bit more information. There was some consideration during the assessment phase of the project about maximum scale of single structure. In looking into that one a little bit further, a lot of the communities that use this tool are looking at larger sites, larger developments. It didn't feel as applicable to Manitou Springs, so we're not making that recommendation. Jackson, Wyoming, and Teton County are one area that has really pushed the envelope on slope development. And they do have a 25% slope max, so where you have a 30%, that was one of our thoughts was, 30, 25, and I might need to talk to Karen a little bit more about that, but, we could drop that maximum to 25%. And then, like I said, they limit their development areas to 10%. They do allow 15% in the county, but that's where that threshold for those additional evaluations and analysis come in. Longmont, Colorado has some pretty decent cluster lot subdivision standards that we could borrow some language from, and they work really well. Again, this is sometimes a little bit more targeted to larger development or a subdivision development, which you may not see a whole lot more of in Manitou Springs, but we could strengthen that language in the code, which does help with the slope considerations. So our recommendations would be to implement a cap on maximum impervious surface area. We could use something like Teton did with the 10,000 square feet or 60% maximum. A lot of your lots are smaller, so I think the percentage might work the best. Prepare those process graphics, and then possibly look at tweaking those numbers, the 30% and 17% to a 25 and 10. I don't expect you all to say yes or no on those numbers, but if you feel that the direction might work with, if us giving a little bit more background information from Karen, then I just want to know if we're headed in the right direction on some minor tweaks to make this section even stronger. Yes, Alan?
I would vote for considering a 25%.
Okay.
Rather than 30. I think that might be useful as we go forward, just because the remaining buildable areas are pretty steep and pretty scary sometimes.
Great. Yes?
When you talk about the percentage here, the 60% maximum, does that include the land on which the building is located?
Yes.
So
Yeah,
it's not
so-
maximum of, what is it, impervious, it includes the building.
Right,
So
because
in other words, you're saying that you would want to make sure that there's at least 40% of raw land that's not covered with.
or pervious, it could be pervious pavers. If you have paving area, it could be pervious pavers. I know Denver tried it and it didn't work very well, but rooftop gardens could play into that, where you're capturing water on a rooftop and dispersing it maybe through a bioswale or something, so that you're not just having, a lot of the newer modern development is flat roofs. So if we can, rather than shutting the water off and down, if we can capture some of that water and bring it down slowly, that could be a consideration for working into that percentage. Rooftop gardens are difficult in Colorado, but if someone wants to give it a try and put in the infrastructure, I don't think we should prohibit that.
The one thing is they prevent the deer from getting to your flowers.
There you go. You might have just solved the ultimate problem. Raccoons can still get up there. Okay, so I know that was super, super fast, but this is so technical. I just thought I wanted to kind of get a general feel for, and I saw a lot of head nodding, so it sounds like these tweaks might be in the right direction.
Yeah, and I echo Julie's comment. Definitely talk to Karen, because she's
Okay,
the one that
great.
lived this for a year and a half.
Awesome. She's been a great resource so far, but we'll talk to her specifically about this one. Okay. Any other questions or thoughts on that one? Okay. All right, well, that is the end of our meeting. And I just wanted to let you guys know that we do have a sustainability questionnaire that we put together. We just need to get that launched. And the Module 1 draft is on my desktop right now, nearly complete, getting distributed to staff tomorrow. And then they will have a chance to review, and then it will come to you guys at least 2 weeks prior to our next meeting, so you have a chance to really look through that, and we can discuss that, the use table, and ADUs at the next meeting. Yes?
Did we talk about already, or is it coming up on the agenda, setbacks
So we
for
haven't
new
talked,
development?
yeah, we haven't talked specifically about setbacks, but they are included in the Module 1 that's coming to you, so that would be a great time to look at those and make sure that
Will you
they're
be able to tell us what is existing as well as what's proposed? Because that would, at least for me, that would really help me, because I don't have the patience to look up what's existing.
Yeah.
And so if I see something that's proposed and it's significantly different from what we have now, it would be helpful to know that, if it's different in the right direction or not. So
Right.
when you present to us, if you could give us some kind of, depending if it's chart or if it's just, written out, tell us what do we have and how do you suggest it be changed so
Great.
that we can wrap our brains around it?
Yeah, and the way that the module will come to you, it will be, we've used your existing language and then track changes in Word. So anything that is existing language will just show up in black text. Anything that we are proposing to strike will be strike through, and any new language will be underlined. So you'll be able to see the comparison side by side. And we often put notes down the side column of, things that we're still kind of thinking through that we want you guys to look at specifically. And we can put together a summary too, yeah. And maybe even specific questions we have, because it will be a lot of information and could be a very lengthy conversation. So we could kind of target it down to your specific issues that you might have found in the document and specific questions we still have.
I'll just give you a heads up that I'll be asking about flag lots
Okay,
and corner lots.
great, okay. And we did take some preliminary language to the URA last week on the design guidelines for that new zone district. So they're actually reviewing it right now, and we'll get some notes back to us in time to incorporate them for the draft to you. a lot in the works right now.
Okay, thank you very
Great.
much. That went much faster in the end than you
I know, I
wanted,
was getting worried, and then I thought, well, this last section could be pretty quick, so. Great,
So,
thank you,
yeah.
guys.
Yeah, all right. Any further questions, any follow? Okay, great. Well, Planning Commission is excused unless you have any other comments for us. And we do have just a couple more minutes for City Council. So if Planning Commission can leave fairly quietly, I would appreciate it. And we'll be out of here within 5 minutes, I promise. Does anyone have any council correspondence? John?
Yes, I'm really concerned about what's going on at the corner there of Lover's Lane. We now have a road cut that's going up into the, what is it? I think it's the official address is what, 122 Washington, but it starts right down here at the corner of the Wichita lot, okay? They've been up there with a bulldozer and whatnot, and I think we now have something like 15-foot cut walls of a driveway. I don't believe that there's any kind of grading permit that's been pulled. I can find nothing in the county records that show that they pulled a building permit. As near as I can tell in reviewing the documents, it appears like there was a temporary geohazard permit given to the owner about 2018 to basically get some kind of equipment up there to do geohazard thing. But this fellow has been chipping away, and we are now at 15-foot tall driveway walls. So if you want to go see it, just drive down to the corner of the Wichita lot on Lover's Lane and look up the hill there, and you'll see it. I don't think, seems like to me, this guy needs to have visited City Hall and looked at all this kind of stuff and slope analysis and everything else. I can't even imagine. There's been a few see-click fixes. It seems like they've been all kind of closed out, but I think city staff needs to get up there and look at what the heck is going on.
Great takes. That's kind of disconcerting to hear, yeah. So thanks for bringing that up. Natalie?
So two things. One, and I sort of mentioned this before, but I had a request for a deer crossing sign, and I have no idea what happens. But then we brought up turkey crossing signs and duck crossing signs, and so I don't know if it's a larger conversation about animal crossing signs, but I just thought I would throw that out there again. And then the other was that I did have one person approach me about this, this death of this other 4-year-old child, and obviously it's complicated and not, but just the idea that in general, people are stressed, mental health, do our families need support, and are there conversations that the city, and then she also asked about the school as well, but is there any conversations our city is having around those issues?
Thanks, Natalie. Judith?
So I've had 4 residents come over to my house, really furious about the speeding. I mean, it's bad. I mean, it's horrible. Oh, sure. And so anyway, they just knock on the door because I live there, and but there are some residents that are just really ready to go ballistic. We had an incident yesterday. I mean, segueing into deer crossing, just yesterday, a mom, a deer, and her 2 little babies crossing the street, and we had a male driver barreling up the street, and instead of screeching to a halt, he laid on his horn and accelerated. And I'm so grateful that those animals had a chance to scatter. Because, I mean, it's gotten that bad. And so I think the residents, this goes back to Shelley Cabot, right, who approved painting the speed signs on the roads, and we talked about perhaps a bike lane, anything to slow it up. But I think it's getting to the point where the residents on El Paso and Beckers, especially with Beckers Lane Bridge opening, are quite fed up. That's all I've got. Thanks. Right, yeah. Right, with the speeding, well, and so, and just that, they've been waiting for so long, and some solutions have been discussed, and again, this goes back to Shelley Cabot, and so they're just really running out of, I had a resident say that they don't believe anything's gonna happen, and I said, well, you just, contact the city, and they're working on it, but, I'm at the point where I really do feel their pain. It's horrible. I mean, if you put, I know we don't have extra police people, but I mean, you'd keep an officer very busy, very, very busy controlling traffic over there until we can, come up with another solution. So I'm just the messenger. I'm reporting what I've heard, and I hope that that I can come back to those residents and tell them that some action's going to be taken soon. Thanks. Thanks. Julie.
I only have one thing. I got contacted by a resident who is still very upset that there's no sidewalk up there on Fairview and Roxton, which is apparently, talk about speeding, people speeding around that corner, and no sidewalks, and children and families and residents. And when we brought this up, when John Shader brought it up, 9 months ago, Dole said, oh no, you gotta wait. We're not going to do that until we do the whole master plan thing or whatever, but I don't want to wait anymore. I don't think it's right, and it's at least as dangerous as the COVID in school in terms of the death risk. So that's an important thing for this person in Ward 3. That's all I have.
Thanks. I had a couple things. One was at the URA meeting the other morning, and they talked about naming the Beckers Lane Bridge. And it would just seem like over the years we've named things kind of in an arbitrary fashion, so perhaps the city could use a naming protocol for pavilions and buildings and bridges and so on. I don't think there is one, but I would just suggest that. And the Beckers Lane Bridge is open. It'll be formally open probably on the 21st of September. They'll have I think it was the 21st, right? Ceremony to open the bridge. And echoing Judith's concerns, I was walking around the neighborhoods in my ward on Saturday and Sunday, and the one issue in Crystal Hills continues to be U-turns on Crystal Hills Boulevard by Emerald Fields. I don't know how to fix it. There's no U-turn signs, but it's way too late by the time they get up there. So I don't have a suggestion, but it's just continues to be an issue there. And then, of course, down in the Beckers Lane area, the speeding and not perceiving any enforcement of it, or enforcement or mitigating factors for the speeding down there on El Paso and Beckers Lane. So that's all I have. Moving on, City Administrator's report.
All right, so I have some good news on some of the items tonight. So started researching radar speed limit signs. They're shown to be about 80% effective in slowing down traffic. And what happens is when people are driving, it shows their speed limit. It reduces their speed by 10 to 20% and has about a 30 to 6% compliance. So it could be helpful. Speed bumps and humps are not as effective. So it may be another step there. As you know, getting the contractors out is we're working on that. The plan is to do the striping, narrow the lanes, and put the speed limits on the road, but it's going to take some time to get the contractors out. COVID has started slowing things down again with staff out there, so we are working on that, and we have bids, and we'll be setting that up soon. So Beckers will be a perfect place for the kind of a pilot on these radar speed limit signs, so they seem really effective. They also have a device, which I'm looking at, where you can place them on streets and basically give us a study without people knowing what their speed limit is, and then we'll have data to be able to see the problems. So we're looking at things like that as well. The Ruxton crosswalk, I heard you the last couple of meetings. Jeff Jones and I did a study of the area, and we 100% agree of the danger around that corner. So part of our striping plan is to go ahead and stripe a green pedestrian bicycle lane on the right side. The lane right now with the current striping is very narrow into the turn, which is part of the problem, so cars stay in that tight corner. So we're gonna move that line over, and then we're gonna create a green bike ped lane there so that it's safer as best we can until, of course, future construction in the area. So we're hoping that will help a lot. And I believe, Mr. Sheda, you were mentioning any kind of bright thing could be helpful as people notice. I also have one extra sign we're going to place that says 15 miles per hour caution pedestrian area. We're going to place that as well to try to give some more indication to the drivers. Finally, I'll be going to Idaho Springs and Breckenridge to meet with Interstate Parking to look at those cities and maybe another one on what they're doing for parking and mobility and trying to get some ideas for Manitou. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Can I ask a question, Roy?
Yes,
So
ma'am.
could you describe the radar speed limit sign? I mean, because one of the things that I know the residents didn't want was one of those lighted blinking machines there. So is this going to be a lighted?
Correct.
I mean, because that's not, that's, you know, that's,
It's a speed limit sign,
okay.
but it has the digital flash or flashing or not flashing, but it shows you your speed limit. So if they don't want one of those, then we can put a regular sign. Speed humps, speed bumps, or something we'll have to do some more research in that area and then studies because of the possible dangers involved. If you have people speeding and down that road and then they hit that at a high speed, you may have a car in someone's grass or their house, so there is a danger involved with speed humps and bumps, and a lot of cities are starting to stop using that as a method. Plus, they're just not as effective. People go around them, and then you have to have fire and emergency access as well. So you normally have to stagger them, which then people figure out and then start slalom down your road there. So there's a lot of problems that come with that. So we could try the digital ones on El Paso to see how bright they are, and it's possible they can be dimmed. But the idea is that when you're driving and you see the speed limit and you suddenly see what you're doing, it wakes people up. And I don't think people always speed purposely. I think they just start driving. And in your case, you had one that was purposely and didn't care. But
I'm just, and I'll go door to door on this one, but
Yes.
I'm just thinking that the residents, the last thing they are going to be really happy with is more light pollution and more flashing lights. So we're really trying to be Crystal Hills. We want to see the stars. We want to have dark sky. So anyway, I would. There was some talk about a stop sign at Becker's and the Via, a three-way so anyway, I know there's solutions that.
yeah, there was a lot of negative comments about the stop sign too.
So anyway, thank you for that, and food for thought, and we'll see what the neighborhood wants.
I'll send you information.
Great.
And then you can show the neighborhood. And again, if they don't want it,
Okay.
that's okay. The idea is I'm going to keep searching for solutions, and then you can say no, and that's okay. But there's only so many options, and
True.
If you want to stop speeding or minimize it, I guess, because you'll never stop it, then we have to find something that's effective. And
The folks I talked to, about a dozen or so, were thrilled about the idea, just the thought of, since you're painting and paint is cheap, of the bike lane.
We're gonna narrow the lane, so you'll have a bigger parking bike lane over there. So we're
Okay.
gonna narrow them to 10 feet, which is you can almost go 9 feet, but probably 10 feet's better for that road. And that makes people want to drive in the lane, so it slows them down a bit.
That's
So
great.
you'll have a safer buffer.
Okay.
And then we'll still do those markings on the road as well. And I'll send you, again, those pictures of how they look, and think about it. Maybe it's not as bright as people think and not an interference, I don't know.
Well, and who knows, the neighbors might go, that's the best thing that I ever heard, and I can't wait. So
Okay,
either way, I'll
sounds
give you
fair.
that feedback.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Roy, when do you think the painting is going to happen? I know we've been trying for the last 4 weeks plus, and it's just, can you give a general idea?
Yes, so Jeff Jones is on vacation this week, and he'll be back next week. The contractor is finishing up, because we have several areas we got to do. not just the Beckers and El Paso. So we should finalize the complete bid by next week. And then I'm hoping to move forward, in maybe 2 to 3 weeks. And that may be pushing it, but that's, I'm also getting some pushback on, towards the end of the business, the visitors, and so that's a struggle too. But we plan on trying to strategically set that up to minimize interference. A lot of the striping is fairly quick in areas to do. And El Paso actually should be one of the easiest ones because we can direct and do portions, and the other ones are a little tighter. But I'm hoping, I'll say 3 to 4 weeks just to be safe. And I'll push it as hard as I can to get going.
Just a couple of things. Natalie, I know you asked about issues and around stress for the community. I did meet with a group about the trauma-informed community. So we're talking about that now, which is really talking about empathy and grace, especially during these times. The last thing we need, I think, is more stress as we go forward. So I'm talking with them now and seeing how we can move forward. So I'll keep you updated on that. I just had my first meeting last week with them. And I'll keep you updated as we move forward. The other thing I just wanted to say, that 122 Washington, it just came to my attention today. So I'm working on that right now. Hope to have an answer tomorrow, and I will let council know on that.
What's that
I'll send an
about,
email.
Denise? I don't know, 122 Washington. Thank you.
So I'll do that. I'll also follow up with the police regarding, because I know your community meeting, you asked for more, and they said that they would look at doing some more enforcement in your area. So I'll follow up with that tomorrow and see where we are with that. I do want to mention speed bumps. They're good and they're bad. They can cause a lot of noise also. And so there's some of that that comes with speed bumps or dips, as there's noise that come with it, as with everything as we go forward. I do want to mention, and Councilor Shada, you mentioned being up at the COG this weekend during the race, et cetera. I was down here during them, and I just want to say I think that overall it went very smooth, and I want to recognize staff. Parking did phenomenal. Megan received numerous compliments on how it was well run and those things. So I want to recognize staff for a weekend that went very well. We had some staff picking up trash, doing other things as we move forward. So I just want to recognize Judy, Skylar, Megan, and all of parking. Those were our MODs and who was working this weekend and in at 4 a.m., 5 a.m., et cetera. So I'd like to make sure that I recognize them for all of their hard work over the weekend. Other than that, I don't have anything at this point, unless if you have things for me. Thank you.
I have a question, if I could, before we adjourn.
Sure.
What are we going to do about Christine leaving? Are you going to hire a temporary person, or how are you going to manage that department?
I sent an email out to all of City Council today about the plan moving forward, but right now I'm looking for an interim. I'm managing most of the projects as we move forward, and then we've already got it posted and moving on that to see how, but it's going to take some time to fill it. But I am looking for an interim at this point as we move forward.
Thanks, and just a reminder that next week, the City Council will be in Memorial Park, fire and police swearing in with their families, so something of a celebration and, a little lighter than our meetings normally are. So we'll see you all there. And
then the following week, the 7th, we're doing the executive session starting at 5:30.
5:30, yes, on Serpentine. So with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll second.
All in favor? Hooah. Thank you all.